I never imagined that humiliation could arrive dressed in silk and served alongside champagne. There I was, sitting in the third row of my younger sister's wedding, wearing the only formal dress I owned. I was doing my best to blend into a crowd of polished, perfect people who had never worked 2 jobs or wondered how they'd pay rent. My son, Luca, sat beside me, his little legs swinging under the chair. He wore a suit that cost me 2 paychecks to buy, and he looked so proud to be included. He honestly believed that maybe, just maybe, this day would make us feel like part of the family again. I think I was clinging to the same hope. Vivian, my sister, glided through the event like she belonged on a magazine cover. She'd always had that quality. Radiant, admired, adored by everyone, especially our mother. She collected compliments like trophies. I got compared to her. She was the one in the spotlight, while I learned to make myself invisible. But still, I came. I clapped when they kissed. I smiled at strangers who asked, "And you're the older sister? You don't look old enough to have an 8-year-old." Then the speeches began. The groom's best friend went first, telling harmless stories that got a few polite chuckles. And then Vivian stood up. I expected her to share something heartfelt, maybe a memory of when we were children, or some sweet words about love. I even lifted my glass, hoping she would say something kind. I should have known better. Vivian lifted her glass and looked around the crowd, her smile wide and gleaming. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice smooth. "It means so much to have everyone I care about with me today." Then she paused, turned toward me, and her smile sharpened. "And of course, I want to say something about my big sister." I glanced down at Luca, who was staring up at her with bright eyes, expecting something nice. Vivian went on, "She's always been an example. A single mom, strong, independent, and apparently not desirable to anyone else." The laughter was immediate and loud. My stomach flipped over. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard her, but she kept grinning like she'd told the most charming joke. A few people looked uncomfortable, but most laughed harder, clinking their glasses. I didn't know where to look. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud it drowned out everything else. Luca tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Mama, why did she say that about you?" Before I could answer, my mother's voice rang out from her table. "She's a used product, but she still looks good for her age." More laughter. It was the kind of laughter that tears through your skin and brands you as something less than everyone else. I felt my face flush hot, but I refused to let a single tear fall. Not in front of my son. Not in front of them. I gripped my napkin so tightly under the table my knuckles hurt. I looked around the room, hoping someone would meet my eyes and offer a little humanity. My grandfather looked down at his plate. My cousin smirked at her phone. Even my uncle, who once told me I reminded him of my father, wouldn't look up. And Luca, my sweet boy, just stared at me with his eyebrows pinched, confused and hurt. That was the moment I broke inside. Not because of the words or the laughter or the shame, but because my son was watching all of it, trying to figure out why the woman who read him bedtime stories and patched his jeans was being ridiculed by her own family. I wanted to leave, to stand up, take his hand, and never return. But my legs wouldn't move. I tried to swallow and found my mouth dry. I searched for something to say, some way to defend myself, but nothing came. Then I heard the scrape of a chair. Callum, the groom, Vivian's immaculate, well-spoken fiancé, stood up. He didn't look amused. He didn't look at Vivian. His eyes locked onto mine, and the whole room fell quiet. In that moment, I knew something was about to happen. Not a rescue, not an argument, but something deeper. People think that being the eldest sibling means you get respect by default. In my family, being the oldest only meant I was the example of how not to live. I'm Lara, 34 years old. Single mom. The black sheep everyone pretended wasn't there. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I work mornings at a cafe and nights behind the front desk of a small hotel. My life isn't fancy, but it's mine. I make pancakes with Luca on Saturdays. I patch holes in his jeans. And he tells me I'm his superhero. That's always been enough to keep going. But in my family, being a single mother was a scarlet letter. Judith, my mother, never missed an opportunity to remind me of it. When I got pregnant, I was 25, in love with a man who promised he'd stay. By the 5th month, he was gone without explanation. My family never asked questions. They offered no help, only judgment. But when Luca was born, every bitter word they'd ever spoken became background noise. Still, a part of me always hoped they'd see me one day, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone worthy of love. That was why, when the invitation to the wedding came, I said yes, even though my name was spelled wrong, even though I knew I'd be sitting alone. I told myself maybe it was their way of extending a quiet truce. The venue was beautiful. White roses, golden silverware, music drifting through the air. Vivian looked like she'd stepped off a bridal catalog cover. When she walked past me, her smile flickered. "You made it," she said like she hadn't expected me to. She glanced at Luca. "He's gotten big." Then she turned away. Judith didn't even look at me. But Luca was beaming. He whispered that the chandelier looked like a spaceship and Vivian looked like a princess. Seeing his happiness, I decided to stay. Our table was by the restrooms. Table 9. Fitting. We ate our salads. I cleaned mousse off Luca's tie. I tried to ignore the whispers and the glances. When the speeches started, I realized this was never about family healing. It was Vivian's stage. And I was about to be her punchline. Her toast started sweet, full of rehearsed affection. But then she turned to me. "I'd like to recognize my big sister," she said, smiling that thin, satisfied smile. "She's the strongest woman I know. Raising a child alone. No husband, no partner. Just her. And whoever was kind enough to babysit." A ripple of laughter. "It's honestly impressive," she went on, voice syrupy. "Unwanted by anyone, yet still showing up." The laughter grew loud and unrestrained. My hands froze. My heart sank. I looked down at Luca, who was frowning, confused. And then my mother's voice, clear and cruel. "She's used goods, but she still polishes up well." Another round of laughter. I felt like I'd been slapped. No one had touched me. They didn't have to. I could feel the judgment seeping into my skin. Luca leaned close, whispering, "Why did she say that?" I didn't know how to answer. I looked for an escape, someone to say enough. But no one did. Even Grandpa Norman, who used to call me his little lion, wouldn't meet my gaze. I could have endured it if it were just me. I'd been enduring it for years. But watching my son see it, that was something I couldn't forgive. I pushed back my chair, my hands shaking. I was ready to leave quietly. Then Callum stood. He took the microphone from Vivian. The entire room stilled. His voice was calm and firm. "Lara, don't go." I stopped. The whispers swirled around us. Vivian froze. Judith narrowed her eyes. Callum didn't look at them. Only me. "I can't pretend this is okay," he said. "I won't sit here and watch cruelty be passed off as a joke." He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he was standing by our table. "Everyone here talks about family and tradition," he continued, voice steady. "But what I just saw wasn't family. It was mockery. He turned to Vivian. You ridiculed your sister for raising her child alone. You humiliated her in front of her son. You turned this day into a spectacle. Vivian's lips parted, but she said nothing. Callum didn't wait. She didn't ask to be in that situation, but she came anyway. She sat here with dignity while you made her the punchline. Then he looked at Luca and spoke gently. Your mom is the strongest person in this room. Don't ever forget that. He set the microphone down, walked past Vivian without another word, and left. I stood there, holding Luca's hand, feeling something inside me uncoil for the first time in years. No music resumed. No one spoke. For once, I wasn't the one left in pieces. I stood still for a moment, absorbing the silence. Vivian remained at the head table, her shoulders drooping, her face pale and uncertain for the first time in her life. Judith broke the quiet, her voice sharp but strangely hollow. What an ungrateful man, she hissed. He humiliated you in front of everyone, just like your sister, always making things about her. But her words didn't land the way they used to. They fell flat and empty, like air leaking out of a balloon. I didn't reply. I no longer felt the need to defend myself. I turned to Luca, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "Let's go home." He nodded, relief flashing across his little face. As we walked toward the exit, people moved aside. Some kept their eyes fixed on the floor. A few looked like they were trying to work up the courage to say something. But no one did. Halfway to the door, I heard my name. Lara. I turned. My grandfather, Norman, was standing, his eyes damp, his hands trembling as he leaned on the back of his chair. He stepped toward me, slower than I remembered him ever moving. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough and weak. "I should have stood up for you. Years ago." I nodded once, unable to speak. I wasn't angry. I knew what fear of conflict could do to a person, but I also knew I didn't have to carry his regret any longer. When we stepped out into the night air, the sky was dark and clear. A breeze moved across the parking lot, cool against my burning cheeks. Luca squeezed my hand. "Is the wedding over?" he asked, his voice so small it hurt. I looked up at the glowing windows behind us and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. "Yes," I told him. "I think it ended the way it was supposed to." He didn't ask anything else. We crossed the gravel, climbed into the car, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires and the occasional sniffle from the back seat. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need anything to fill the space. It was enough to just be there, away from them, with my son safe beside me. At home, I helped Luca change into his pajamas and tucked him into bed. I kissed his forehead and lingered in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of his breath. I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I felt lighter. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone covered in notifications. Dozens of missed calls. Numbers I didn't recognize. Texts from distant relatives. I ignored them all. A little later, a message from an old friend popped up. Someone posted a video of Callum's speech. It's all over Facebook. Over 50,000 views. You need to see the comments. I hesitated only a second before opening it. There he was, standing beside my table, his voice steady, telling the truth everyone else had been too scared to say. In the video, I didn't look small or ashamed. I looked like someone who had finally been seen. Below, thousands of comments scrolled by. He's incredible. She deserved better. Every single mom needed to hear this. I'm crying watching this. This is what standing up looks like. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling something in my chest loosen, like a knot coming undone. That week, Vivian tried to twist the story. She claimed Callum had overreacted, that it was only a harmless joke. But the truth had already spread too far to be contained. No one was laughing anymore. A few days later, a small bouquet of wildflowers arrived at my door. No note, only a card that read, "To the Lioness." I didn't need to wonder who had sent them. The wedding didn't happen, but something more meaningful did. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left carrying the shame. 6 months later, Vivian and Callum formally ended their engagement. There was no announcement, no spectacle, just quiet erasure. Photos deleted, plans cancelled, silence where there used to be bragging. Vivian slipped back into her old life like nothing had ever happened. She never reached out to me. Judith called once, not to apologize, but to scold me. "You embarrassed the family by refusing to laugh. You made things so awkward." I listened for half a minute, then spoke the words I never thought I'd be strong enough to say. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." Then I hung up. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was clean and final. I realized then that I didn't need an apology from any of them. I didn't need them to finally recognize my worth. I only needed to stop waiting for their permission to believe in it myself. Life didn't transform overnight. I still worked long shifts. Some nights, I still made 2 dinners, pancakes for Luca, something green for me. But I carried myself differently. I no longer hid in corners or kept my head down. And Luca was changing, too. He started asking bigger questions. Why some people are unkind and why others are brave. He told me he thought Callum was like a superhero. Sometimes, he'd line up his action figures and pretend they were giving speeches about standing up for the little guy. One evening, as we brushed our teeth, Luca looked at me in the mirror and asked, "Mom, are you still sad about what Aunt Vivian said?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Not anymore." "Good," he replied, toothpaste on his chin. "Because I think you won, even if it wasn't a fight." That stayed with me. Because he was right. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't demanded an apology. I'd simply stood up, taken my child's hand, and walked out. And someone else, someone unexpected, had decided that silence wasn't good enough anymore. Callum hadn't just defended me. He reminded everyone in that room, and thousands watching online, what love really looks like. Not the kind that wears a tuxedo or throws a lavish reception. The kind that sees cruelty and says, "No, not today." If I learned anything, it was this. Being alone doesn't mean you're unworthy. Being kind doesn't make you weak. And when you reclaim your dignity, no one can ever take it away again. So no, I didn't dance at my sister's wedding. I didn't toast the happy couple or cry tears of joy under twinkle lights. But I left with something much more important than their approval. I left with my head high, my son by my side, and the deep, unshakable certainty that I never again had to explain myself to anyone. That was the ending no one saw coming, and exactly the one I deserved. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt small in a room full of people who should have stood up for you, remember this: your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And you are not alone. If you felt something reading this, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like more true stories about courage, resilience, and what it means to be human, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for being here.